Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Lounge. I'm your host, Randy Likas, and today I'm excited to welcome Roman Gruhn to the show. Roman is Vice President of Revenue Operations at Multiverse. Prior to Multiverse, he held a similar role at Remote. He also spent nearly 7.5 years at MongoDB during a period of rocket ship growth as the VP of Sales Operations and Technology. Roman, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Randy. Pleasure to be here.
So, Roman, I would love to just start the episode and have you walk us through a little bit about career background and journey. Tell us a little bit about what you did prior to Multiverse. And I know that you've stepped into this role, 3 or 4 months back. And so I'd just love to learn more about the roles and responsibilities that you have currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did I start? For me, getting into SaaS and go-to-market really started with computer science. I've got a traditional computer science degree, but wasn't really going to be, I think, that successful as an engineer. I was maybe half decent, definitely not going to make a major career out of it. So somehow I got into management consulting, technology consulting, digital transformation, operating models. First a bit more on the technical side, later on a bit more on the business side. And before I went into SaaS at MongoDB, I was basically working for PwC in the UK, doing digital transformation for mostly entertainment and media companies, helping broadcasters and music companies and rights companies, etc., modernize their ways of working, the operating models, maybe even come up with completely new ideas to monetize their back catalog, those kind of things. And from there I got into SaaS at MongoDB. And to be honest, I didn't really know that much about sales. I didn't know that much about how enterprise SaaS companies worked. I had a lot of gaps, so actually quite surprising that they hired me in the end. But somehow I made it work. But all jokes aside, I really loved it. My first role was a bit more field-based, actually. We were combining computer science engineering background, or at least understanding, with management consulting or consultative approach to selling. It was an overlay role that worked alongside our major account AEs and strategic AEs to help up-level the sales process for our bigger strategic accounts, getting away from 50, 60, 70, 80K deals to 150, 250, $500,000 deals. And I've done that for a couple of quarters before I then actually went more into a behind-the-scenes role in go-to-market strategy, working on internal projects for our head of EMEA, became his chief of staff, became chief of staff for our CRO, worked for him for a long period of time before going into sales operations and sales technology at MongoDB. Stayed there for another 2 and a bit years, I think, before I then left MongoDB. It was an absolutely fantastic time, probably the biggest learning journey that I've ever had in my career. At least so far. Let's see what still comes. Took a bit of a break. We had our first child at the time, and then where I joined Remote, where I, obviously much smaller company compared to MongoDB, very interesting challenges, very interesting task to rebuild the RevOps team there, structured, maybe fresh, new, hire a lot, upskill a lot of the people, redefine roles, and really set up Remote for success and major growth. Still at a trajectory at 50% year over year, even to this day. So obviously there come a lot of go-to-market challenges and process challenges. What you built 1 year or 2 years ago is completely obsolete at that point. You really need to rebuild every couple of years. So we've done that for a while. And then similar again, I took a bit of a break. We had a bit of a DIY project going on at home, and the easiest for me, to be honest, was just to be off. I have time with my family. We traveled a bit. We went to Spain. We went to Germany. I'm originally from Germany, so we visited family while the contractors were ripping apart our house. And then we came back and did a bit more work on it ourselves as well. And then, as you said, a couple of months ago now, I joined at Multiverse to lead the RevOps team there.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about your current role. I'd be curious, I think you've been there, 3 or 4 months now?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, what got you excited about the role?
What got me excited is that Multiverse has a very unique product, very unique offering that's almost a little bit hard to understand actually outside of the UK, because it's operating in a regulated market here in the UK and specifically in England. But the opportunity there is huge. The market for upskilling and reskilling, especially in the kind of age of AI and AI transformation, is massive. Yeah. Every company that we talk to has challenges in upskilling their employees around AI and getting the workforce ready for the AI transformation. So there's a huge market for us, a huge opportunity. We're one of the best providers in the UK to offer training and services around that space. And we're really just primarily operating in the UK. So there's a huge growth opportunity for us across Europe, where there's similar regulated markets, but then also around the world and maybe unregulated markets or more commercial markets. So there's a lot of excitement there, a lot of growth opportunity there. I got to know the leadership team. I got to spend some time with the CEO. I got to spend some time with the CFO, who I still know from a prior role. and a lot of the leadership team in general. And it was just a great fit for me. I think we're all looking at the same thing. It was really an enterprise playbook company, which is where I spent most of my time, obviously in SaaS. Like MongoDB is clearly an enterprise playbook company. Remote is slightly different. So for me, I think the enterprise space is a better fit. And from that perspective, it was the ideal fit for me to get back into the game and look at the team and see how we can up-level that and then get the go-to-market team ready for growth.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. What would be really interesting is just get your perspective on what the first few months have been. And what I mean by that is like, how do you go about understanding what you're walking into, what you're inheriting, where the bodies are buried, why things are done the way that they're done? And then the second part of the question would be like, how do you go from taking inventory or kind of learning about the current way of doing things to where you start leaning in and making recommendations on changes?
It's funny, when you start a new role, I always find, well, you go in, you've got ideas, you've got experience, you've seen similar things, and you almost want to, or a lot of people have the tendency to jump to conclusions, right? Like, oh, I've seen this before, I know how to solve this problem. And what you really have to do is sit in your hands, like, I don't know, be quiet and let people speak and let them explain to you how they run their business right now, why they think it's run a certain way. You have to ask a ton of questions, right? Meet with everybody in your team and the other teams, your peers, meet up, meet down, meet people in organizations that have nothing to do with go-to-market, but are somehow adjacent. Maybe they sit in delivery, maybe they sit in finance, maybe they sit somehow in support. Whatever it is, just learn as much as you can about the business and how the different pieces fit together. And for the first couple of weeks, really, for me, it was always, I don't know, this is a 1,000-piece puzzle. Every meeting is a piece, and I probably need to have 1,000 meetings to get it somehow right and understand where this is, and then start to be able to like, okay, now I've got the edge, and like, oh, I've got a blue piece. Where could that fit? Now I understand which area of the company that at least fits into it. There's a topic, there's a, I don't know, some weird acronym that somebody's throwing at you, or a process, or some friction that they're talking about, some issue. And at some point you build up that picture, right? That mental model of how you think the company works. You probably still have it 50% wrong because you just haven't been there for years and years to really understand all the intricacies. But yeah, just talk to a lot of people, ask a lot of questions, take notes, like, hey, your findings, your thoughts, this looks weird, this looks like interesting, this is different, this is the same as this. Completely unqualified, maybe just dump them all into a Google Doc, dump them into a list, like whatever is your way of sorting things. And then I used a bit more ChatGPT and Gemini to organize my thoughts there, like see, okay, what kind of themes can I find? How can I organize this? If I now feed this with additional org chart information about how the teams are structured, or at least the departments and sub-teams and who sits where, like at some point then you get the picture where all these different good, bad and ugly pieces maybe belong to. And then you come up with the first ideas and hypotheses about what might be a good fit. Like, this sounds like we could benefit from this, or it sounds like we shouldn't do that. And then again, you ask lots of questions. You validate with the sales leaders that have been here for a while, with other people around you, and you just see where your thinking is wrong, right? And then you iterate and you learn, and you do that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And at some point, maybe at like 3, 4, 5, 6 months, hopefully, everything really starts to click. And then only then do you really become fully productive and properly dangerous. Right now, I think I've got a few things in the right boxes and I can understand them. And we're already making changes to how my team works and how we're supporting go-to-market, how we're planning for go-to-market changes. And some changes I could already affect coming in. Some things are much more part of the annual planning cycle. So we know that, okay, this is what we want to do differently next year. This is what we want to do differently next quarter. But you can't immediately turn things around just because you find something and nobody has maybe thought about it, because there's a certain rhythm and typically you can't rip it all apart, at least not at the size that we are at. If you go into a company and it's, I don't know, a 5-person sales team and there's no real fiscal quarter yet, nobody necessarily looks at numbers in the same way, then it's much easier to rip it all apart immediately and say you start from scratch. Not that was needed here, but it's harder when you've got, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people in sales, plus management layers, etc. If you've got nearly a 1,000 person company, then everything moves a little bit slower, even though we try to move as fast as we can, but there's just natural constraints and there's customers involved and there's limits, right? How quickly you can change things.
Absolutely. It sounds like you brought a lot of your management consulting background in a way in which is to understand like the change management process, right? In terms of how you go about that. So listen, one insight that I've gotten as I've done the show and talked to many leaders across go-to-market is most leaders are never brought in to do things, to keep things the same, right? They're brought in to influence some change. And you talked about this a little bit earlier about what you saw the market opportunity to be. I'd love to frame this around though, like if you think about a modern B2B enterprise SaaS company and putting the right revenue operations framework in place, how do you define that, and what are the key components of that?
Yeah, you're right. When you come in, right, in a leadership position, typically you're being brought in because you can change something or you're expected to change something, even though the company often doesn't quite know what it wants to change or where it wants to change to. If the path was clear, then either people that were there could have done it, or you just move somebody around within the company and, okay, this is the plan, just execute on it.
Yeah.
So very often you have to define that first. And to do that, I think you first need to understand, okay, what's the company objective? What's the company plan? What's the company vision? Like, where are we going to go to in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years? What are we building for? And then how do we build for that in a scalable way or in a sustainable way? There's always a right fit for any leader at a company, probably at a certain stage. And people that were there maybe before you, they've done things for a certain reason, right? The company was at a certain size or the complexity was at a certain level, and things survive up to a certain degree. And then sometimes you just miss the trick of pulling them out at the right time, and then it becomes untenable. And then sometimes that means also you have to make way for somebody else to actually fix it if you can't do it yourself. And I think it goes back to that analysis point at the beginning. You need to understand, how is it working today? What are the friction points? Which of those are really the big rocks, the big levers that you have to change, and then build a plan towards addressing those. You need to put the right teams obviously in place, not only in your org, but in the other org as well. So if you see that something is missing, right, you need to call it out. You need to hold other people accountable to it. You can't be afraid of stepping on anybody's toes. That's also what you get paid for, right? Like sometimes to ruffle some feathers and call out things, and yeah, you can't just work in your own corner. And obviously the balance is important there, right? You fix your own house first and then you can call out other people, but you can't also do everything in a sequence. So I don't know, these improvements, or not necessarily turnaround projects, but anything where you try to modernize how things are done or change the ways of working for an organization or for a department or a team.
Yeah.
I don't know, you have to be careful. You have to tread a bit carefully. You can only push that fast or that far at the beginning. You need to bring everybody along on the journey. Change management, right? You mentioned that. It always takes longer than you think it does.
Yeah.
And to make change stick is even harder. You can roll it out once, but then people fall back to their old ways of working. You need to constantly repeat that something has changed and why it has changed. You need to think about new hires. You need to think of people that change roles, that get promoted, etc. Bob, we did the training on XYZ last month. It's like, yeah, but you also hired whatever 10 new people since then, so we need to run it again, or we need to find a way to rerun it and make it self-serve or sustainable. So I don't think there's a clear-cut path there, but if you start with the why, if you start with the clear objectives of where you're going, then you can build a strategy and a plan towards that, and then you need to break that down into digestible chunks and pieces. What are the key initiatives that you have to really tackle quarter after quarter that are non-negotiable? These are the things that you have to do, and you really have to do them to actually achieve the ultimate goal where you try to get to. And then around it, you have to fit in the smaller rocks and the pebbles and the sand and everything else that fill up your day naturally, the whirlwind, all the requests, all the great ideas that come up, which are all fantastic, but sometimes they just don't move the needle as much as some of the other stuff, and you have to say no to those ideas. But you can only do that if you've got the big picture somehow laid out or in your head. Right?
Yeah.
Ideally laid out, documented, so it's transparent, etc., but at least you need to be clear about it first.
Yeah. What about organizationally? So I think there's two schools of thought. One is a revenue operations team should be generalists that sort of support all different areas, and others are where we've got like specialists, and maybe in customer success operations, and then we've got a systems person, and we've got a strategy person. And thinking in this modern RevOps structure and best practice, where do you lean?
It really depends on the size of the org that you're supporting, right? If you think about a sales org maybe that has, 20 sales reps plus some management, you need generalists that can do a lot. You might have one person or two people in RevOps or sales ops. That's it. And they have to do systems and policy and support and tech and user setup and configs and everything else. Once you get to an org that's maybe more like 50, 70, 100, 150 people, then you bring in specialization, because you want to make sure that your planning process is really up to scratch. You need to make sure that your territory planning, your quota assignments, all of this is sound and it stacks up and it supports not only this quarter, but the next quarter, the next fiscal, like 2 fiscal years out. Like, how does all this hiring stack up to actually get us to our goals? If we want to get to X 100 million in 1, 2, 3 years, how do we need to break that down into hiring today, next month, the month after? And for that, you sometimes have a different profile than somebody who can then build out actually a scalable Salesforce architecture, right? That is a certain skill that you need again. You don't necessarily need to think and worry about scalability of Salesforce or maybe HubSpot if you've got 20 people. If you've got 200, the situation changes, right? You need to build in a certain way. And those are completely different skill sets, for example, like planning and strategic quota setting versus like building a system, just to name a few, right?
Yeah.
So you bring in specialization, and obviously in between, you then still need to make room for people to also develop and move from one role to another. So I'm a big fan of people actually not just staying in their lane, but also working, not only working with other teams, but even getting a lateral move into another team, moving from an ops team into a strategy team, moving from maybe a systems team into a more stakeholder facing role for data and analytics, for example, or vice versa. And I'd really love to enable that. And yeah, for that, you need people that have a broad range of skills, but are also coachable, adaptable, want to learn, are curious.
Yeah.
So you've got specialization, and you have a few generalists in your team typically as well. Maybe the project managers are a bit more on the general side. Business analysts need to have a big, broad understanding, but they can't go that deep on certain processes or technologies in general, unless the project requires it. And then they build that knowledge up over time, and then maybe they change role again. So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, like it's a generalist or a specialism org. It really depends on the size, depends on where your business is, how fast you're growing. Are you regionalized? Are you not regionalized? What you often see is that almost you grow those support orgs, right? They're specialists. At some point, it becomes like, hey, we need our US team and an EMEA team, and they need to almost be teams within teams, and then you break it down again because, well, okay, we had 20 people. Now we're breaking it down into a US, EMEA, and an APAC team. Well, now we have like whatever, 8-8-4 split maybe. Well, the APAC team has to be generalists because we can't afford like specialists in a small team like that. But the other ones, maybe they can stay specialists, right? So you might also end up with a mix in your team.
You started to get into this a little bit when you just answered the question, but I wanted to just double click on it for a moment. So when you look to hire roles on your team, there's the, I would call maybe the hard skill set, which is knowledge and experience in a particular area, like building comp plans would be an example. What are some of those softer skills? So you mentioned curiosity, you mentioned wanting to learn. When you're talking with folks, what do you look for on the softer skills?
I mean, curiosity and willingness and ability to learn is definitely one of the most important skills I think that anyone in RevOps can have, or maybe in general in life, right? If you're stale and stuck and don't want to move and learn and change, then right now is probably not the right time for you, especially not in tech or SaaS.
Yeah.
So you need to have that. You also need to have some energy and drive and motivation to really get out there and do great things. If you just want an easy job, want to manage your systems or your process or be in charge of whatever domain you're in charge of, but not necessarily go through a lot of whirlwind all the time, then a high growth startup is just not the right fit for you. And I don't say that with judgment. Like there's people that are very, very good at certain jobs and they do them every day and very repeatedly, very reliable, very scalable. But that's not a high growth startup scenario. You need to be a bit more flexible there.
Yeah.
Even though we try to make it less erratic maybe for teams, right? We don't want that whirlwind because it's distraction. It takes away focus. It's a lot of context switching, right? And we're constantly trying to get better at prioritization and minimize that for our teams. But if it happens, you still need to have the right skills to be able to handle it and find your own way of dealing it. So a lot of drive, a lot of energy, and then, coachability is important. Are people able to take on expertise from somebody else that has maybe seen it before, that has done it before, that maybe knows a little bit what they're talking about or can give them the right pointers in the right direction. But at the same time, you also want people that have strong opinions, right? They need to be able to say, you know what, I've got conviction here, let me try this. Like, no, I believe this is the right solution, right? Let me build a prototype, let prove to you that what you're telling me is maybe wrong, but okay, if they then see it's actually not working, then fine, like, okay, disagree and commit, move on to the next one and just let's get this done. So it's a weird mix, but energy is super important, right? People need to be able to think big, but also be pragmatic to break it down into small chunks and know, okay, this is what I need today. This is like my quick win that moves the situation forward, that gets us better. I can't always build for the perfect solution. Like it doesn't exist. There's 20,000 other problems waiting for me. I just need to improve certain situations a little bit. That's good enough. And then I move on. Other areas, you might have to go for the full swing, right? Like you can't just do a good enough situation on compliance, for example. You have to be compliant, so you need to get that done. You need to implement secure systems. You need to have access permissions in place. You can't wing that stuff, but sometimes on a report or on some internal tool that only has been given to a couple of users, you can be a bit more like, hey, that's your V1. We know it's going to break in 3 months and we come back to it, but until then, that's what it is.
Yeah. You know, there's a very interesting dynamic going on right now at larger organizations where RevOps is responsible for the go-to-market organization right across, but I'd say maybe 60% of the time marketing operations is still sitting in marketing. It's not sitting in revenue operations. 40% of the time the reverse. And anecdotally, I think what we're seeing is those that are still splitting it out are still challenged a little bit with a common metrics or a common set of metrics and alignment because they're not sitting in revenue operations. I'd love to get your perspective on that. And should marketing operations be part of revenue operations, or should they sit in marketing?
Oh, that's such a hard conversation, right? Because when you think about revenue operations, yes, the idea was like, hey, marketing ops, sales ops, customer success ops, all under one roof, ideally supporting teams that are all combined, but realistically, marketing hardly ever reports to the CRO. Yeah. Customer success, on the other hand, very often reports now to the CRO, right? So that's more common the situation that I've seen in the market. So it makes a lot of sense to combine sales and customer success ops. Marketing ops is, in many areas at least, a bit different still, especially when you have maybe offerings that have, for example, a self-serve component and a pure product-led growth revenue stream where marketing is really driving a certain part of the revenue that doesn't technically in many areas roll up even to the CRO, even though it's like in theory the CRO, but like some of the SaaS companies have the self-serve revenue sit somewhere else. Yeah. And at that point it's like, well, why does marketing then report to that org or not report to that org? So I think it depends on how you look at your revenue, what are your products, what are your revenue streams, and what's the relationship between marketing and sales. If it's absolutely dependent, or if sales is absolutely dependent on marketing for certain areas, then it makes a lot of sense. And depending on how much of the revenue is dependent on marketing, I think it might make sense to combine it. If there's a lot of outbound, for example, and there's a very strong outbound motion, then you see it often a bit more decoupled. If the revenue streams are more dependent on the inbound, I think you find it more often that it's at least combined. And then that also determines sometimes where the SDRs or BDRs sit. Do they still sit in marketing? Do they already sit in sales? Are they more for the inbound stream? Are they more for outbound? So I'm not sure I've got a strong opinion about it. It really depends on the situation. Yeah. But I think one thing is key, that you have to work together with your marketing ops counterparts more. However much you're doing right now, you probably have to do more, right? And that includes me. Like, we're always falling into that trap of thinking that like what we are doing, the teams that we are supporting, is like the only thing that matters. And you need to think more and more outside of your own box and think about, okay, what are the dependencies here? Like, how do I need to inform people upstream of what we're doing downstream? Whatever I'm doing, like, who could that affect downstream in the data flow, in the process? Who from the operational side needs to be informed about certain changes that we're doing or plan on making? And just try to work more as a team. And sometimes all it takes is like, hey, FYI, we're doing this. Like, you don't need to ask for permission necessarily, right? That's not the point. But try to communicate more, be more transparent about what you're doing. And in the end, you might really be surprised about what the other teams are already doing. They've already solved this challenge. They're already trying to do something here. They already have a scalable way, maybe even of doing it. They have a tool that you want to buy, or some solution, some capability that you want to bring in. It's like, oh, by the way, we've got X. We can just add your module that you need for a much lower price, and actually then we've got the benefit of being in one platform. It happens all the time. Like, lots of people in the industry that I also talk to, that either former peers or people that I'm connected to, like, oh, we tried to do this and tried to do that, and like then we discovered actually marketing had this tool or sales had that tool already, and we just started using it and just get more licenses. Like, makes it a lot easier. Yeah. So yeah, communication is key there. Whatever your structure is, doesn't almost matter. Communication is key. You could be under the same reporting line, still not talk to each other, still not have a shared understanding of what you need to do. Yeah,
that's a fair point. So I want to dig into how you think about KPIs for revenue operations and KPIs in alignment, right? Because it's easy. Sales owns a number. They know they need to deliver on a number. Customer success knows they need to deliver on a retention, or if they own expansion. So they got more direct alignment in terms of what theirs are. Yeah. How do you think about the KPIs for revenue operations? What might some of those be?
Might depend a bit on like what you're doing, how you've structured your team. There's some typical ones, like, okay, what are the tickets? Like, easy one to pick up. Tickets are typically an indication of things that are not going well, depending on how you classify. So real, like, okay, here's an issue report, right? I'm not talking necessarily about change requests, although even getting a lot of change requests to internally build tools or reports or anything like that also indicates that you haven't gotten everything right. You're not building and providing a service that's fit for purpose. So looking at your tickets, that's an easy one. Where do you get them from? Which teams? What are your SLAs? How quickly do you respond? How many do you get resolved in the first instance? How long does it take to resolve them in general? What are the priorities? Are you getting 50 tickets a day that a certain system is down? Or are you getting 20 tickets a day about, like, can you please help me create a certain type of report that I currently don't have? So the severity, the business impact, the criticality, all of that needs to be assessed, and that gives you maybe a first barometer, right? If you look at another big area that RevOps or sales ops is working on, is typically the project. So a bit more proactive, planned delivery. Well, how much have you planned? Have you delivered it? Have you delivered on time? Have you delivered the full scope? What was the customer satisfaction? What was the rollout success like? Hypercare, how many issues did you have during hypercare? Did you do a good job in actually scoping and testing the whole thing? Or once it really got into production, the whole thing fell apart?
Yeah.
How many change requests do you get thereafter? So it kind of loops back to the tickets almost. Once it goes from like being a project into BAU, then it becomes more part of the ticketing process and you monitor it through that. Simple things like customer satisfaction, like your stakeholders are your customers. They are internal, but they're still your customers. How happy are they? Are you querying regularly, or do you have a mechanism of finding out how happy are you with the service that we are providing? How happy are you with the processes that we have and the tools that we have? How productive do you feel you are? Are we supporting you in your day-to-day? How much time do you spend on boring admin overhead that we can maybe try to automate for you? How much time are you spending actually doing your job? And for a seller, how much time are you spending with customers, right? How much time are you spending in customer meetings and pipeline generating and then progressing deals versus everything else? How easy is it for managers to really get the information that they need about their teams? All of those, I think, are metrics that you could measure, baseline, measure, change, and then track again.
Yeah.
And that will effectively tell me whether my team is doing a good job. For me, we've set the mission for us to create the conditions for go-to-market teams to be wildly successful. And yes, like one of these ultimate metrics there is attainment. Do we have broad range attainment, right? If we get a couple of massive spikes and everybody else is not attaining, I have probably done a bad job at territory management. If we have everybody attain, everybody is at 100, 150%, well, okay, I've done a bad job at planning because I haven't hired enough people to actually spread the territory far enough to grow fast enough. So all of these things can tell me necessarily, are we doing a good or a bad job? Like you almost don't want to hit every metric. You want to know like, where are we stretching, where are we not stretching, where are we just about hitting it or kind of exceeding it? And then the combination of those tells me, okay, are we doing a good job as a team or not? But on top of that is also the simple qualitative hallway conversation with the RDs, with the VPs, with the SVPs, right? What's your feeling about, are we supporting you with your team?
Yeah.
Are we giving you more headaches than we're solving? And yeah, that's subjective, but it's still an indication, right? And it still tells you something about the sentiment that's in the org. Is RevOps seen as a blocker or as a supporting function? Are we constantly just seen as the ones that are enforcing a policy, that tell them no, that don't explain things? Whenever we, for example, tell somebody, hey, we can't do this, or no, you can't have that account, or you can't make this change to your team, we always try to lay it out in very simple, logical terms, explain to them, hey, this is the before and after of what would happen. This is the impact to your team. This is the impact maybe to you, but at the same time, this is the impact to the organization. So if we just give everybody all of these accounts that you think are so great, then we don't have those accounts for future hires. Or we create inequity in the team, or we're taking something away from a certain segment where we shouldn't get the accounts from. So trying to lay out your logic typically gets you out of that problem, but still, in the end, it's about attainment and helping go-to-market teams be successful and the company to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next question I wanted to ask you is, there's a really big trend that everyone is talking about right now, which is, hey, we've got to have common metrics across functions. It's no longer acceptable for marketing to say we hit our MQL goals, right? But then sales fall short. And that's just one example. And I think everyone says that we're aligned, but when you peel back the onion, people are still measuring sort of their own siloed areas, right? You're laughing because I know it resonates. What role does RevOps play, and specifically someone in your role play, in really helping bring everyone along to that, what we say we're doing, but yet we're actually not doing?
Well, I think I've seen that a few times now. You try to be aligned as a company and you say, well, we should all have a small set of shared metrics, right? Realistically, that works up at a certain level and makes maybe for great high-level presentations, but to get into the nitty-gritty details on an operational level and really execution level, you need a bit more, right? You need nuances, you need to dive into each team. So my operational metrics or the sales operational metrics are not relevant necessarily for marketing, right? They don't tell them anything, but we might still want to be able to create visibility. I think what's important is that you find those shared metrics, like you should have some of those, right? And they might just really be very high level. Okay, what are our bookings? What is our revenue? What are our EBITDA metrics, right? But then know how the operational ones actually feed into that and how they relate. So if marketing does X, how does that impact one of the operational metrics maybe, or the kind of supporting metrics on the sales side? If sales does this, what does that mean for the support team, for customer success, for professional services, or for the ops teams? So how do they relate and how do they trickle down? Typically there's almost like a flow of something good happening here means typically something good happens in the other teams as well, right? Usually there's some logical connection, and you need to find that, you need to bring it to life and visualize it and explain it to people. And it's not always linear, but at least you can say, well, this seems to be going in like the 110, 120% range here in terms of attainment on the marketing side. We should be able to expect this on the sales side, or this is our hypothesis, how this might change next quarter for us, and then be able to act on that, right? So you're just a little bit ahead of the curve. Yeah, it's the whatever high level shared KPIs are great, but they don't really allow you to run your teams or your departments, and you need to break it down, but you need to find that relation and the dependencies, and then create some shared understanding for those metrics. What do they mean? Ideally, have a shared definition, sure. Have it written down somewhere. How do we actually define these metrics? So if somebody wants to talk about your metric or wants to use your metric or having this hypothesis that what they are doing is going to impact your metric, they should understand how it's defined. They should understand what it actually means and how does that show up on a day-to-day for a sales rep if they do something and if they move that metric up or down, right? And then obviously communicate and share and have those regular touch points between the different departments, whether that's through an MBR or QBR or whatever frequency you want to go through, or like weekly leadership meetings. You need to make sure that you share them. But first you start with the understanding and the definitions.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really insightful. I have one more question for you before we transition into the lightning round, which is a little bit more fun and personal. I don't think there's a board meeting that happens right now where companies are not leaning into like, how do we leverage AI? How do we use that to be more efficient? But I want to ask you the question specifically for revenue operations. What opportunities do you believe AI enables for the revenue operations function?
There's probably two sides to it, right? One is like really internally for revenue operations. There's a huge opportunity for us to automate, streamline, and improve how we work with data. We work with large amounts of data sets typically, right? Whether you look at territory management, or whether you look at attainment, opportunities, leading indicators, activities on deals, call transcripts, whatever it is, there's typically a vast amount of data once you have a sizable sales team. And for us to analyze all of that manually is obviously very cumbersome. You get great insights, but it's very expensive to do. So we can drive a lot more insight and a lot more practical recommendations for the business if we leverage better tooling, find a way to use AI to turn like tools more into a flow, into a sequence, into a process, into an automation, and become almost more like conductors of different instruments that play together instead of necessarily playing the instruments ourselves. Not everything you can today do with AI, but you can definitely operate in a different way as a RevOps team. You can augment what you're doing as an individual, whether that is writing code as a developer or whether that is writing the logic and the queries for a BI dashboard. There is ways to improve how you're working today. And then you can also think about, okay, now how do I deliver this differently? So for example, the dashboard example, great, you're building a dashboard, you're building something in Tableau or somewhere else. You can use AI to help you write the data pipeline and the logic and the queries that actually feed it. You can still be the one that actually builds the dashboard, fine. What can you do on top of that, right? You can also write an agent that helps you analyze the data at scale, identifies the patterns, and almost feeds those patterns into things that the sales leader should look at as a daily, as a weekly, as a monthly feed. Hey, here's your dashboard for self-serve, but by the way, here are the 5 things you actually should be looking at. These are the 2 teams that are out of pattern. These are the ones that are really extreme. These are the ones that are good. These are the movers and shakers. This is what we found. This just looks a bit off. This warrants a conversation. So you don't ask people to necessarily even use the dashboards anymore, but you just prompt them directly where should they look. You will never get away from building sales dashboards for leaders, but you can make their life certainly a lot easier by telling them what do they actually need to look at. And I think there's lots of opportunities for that all around RevOps. And then the other part is go to market in general, right? There's processes that we ask our sales reps to go through, whether that is account research or prospect research or personalization, writing messages, sequencing, engaging with people, thinking about a script, thinking about creating content, thinking about creating value pyramids. All of these are things that can be augmented or automated or improved, streamlined using AI or AI tooling. The interesting point here right now is that everybody's, I think, trying to do it. Everybody's trying to figure out what's the best tool for your use case and your scenario. There's a lot of experimentation going on in our company and lots of other companies. I think it's a very interesting space and interesting time right now because there's so much activity happening. There's also a lot of people that are worried about like, oh, are we doing the wrong thing? At least doing something and trying it and experimenting, you're already better than most people that are still sitting on their hands and worrying about it. So whether you get it right almost doesn't matter. So that's what I at least tell my team. I want you to all like just play around with it, experiment, find ideas, give a use case a go and see if you can make it work. Maybe that's not the right tool. Maybe we need something else. Maybe we need to speak to somebody in engineering. How have they optimized this? Can we find, I don't know, a different platform to do this? But you need to train that muscle. You need to train the muscle of thinking, how can I think about a process differently and redesign it from scratch almost, using AI tools, using AI assisted opportunities or tooling. And that is something that we need to do faster. I think a lot of companies are too slow there. But it's an exciting time to actually be in RevOps as well, because the go-to-market space is extremely hot right now. The amount of newsletters that you could read and the amount of companies that are getting spun up all the time is absolutely crazy. I mean, use AI to summarize that stuff for you, just as a tip here, right? Don't read all that stuff yourself. Get the commonalities across even podcasts if you want to, and use that as a learning or as a prompt for yourself to then go off in a direction and do some actual reading and research for yourself. But yeah, it's a super exciting time.
And it's changing so rapidly as well. We've got an opinion on it right now. If we have this conversation a year from now, our data points and talking points probably will be a lot different, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go over to the lightning rounds. The one question I was going to ask you, you did a great job of talking a little bit about it when you're traveling and the house remodel and things like that.
Yeah.
When I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, I saw that you'd taken a little bit of time for yourself to do some of those things. The question I had for you is, were you able to decompress? Were you able to get away? But you had a lot going on. So just curious, were you able to decompress, or did some of those stresses with the house, just different types of stresses, I guess?
Well, it is quite stressful. Probably anybody who's done a house remodel and is not necessarily right next door is probably thinking about it pretty much every day. We made that conscious decision to kind of like be away, come back, be away, come back. So we checked in. Like, I don't really know if they're kind of like taking their wall out in the right way, or if the way that they build up the new wall with brick and cement is done properly. I can't add to anything to that process, right? But I know where I want the light switches, and I know what I want in terms of fittings and all of that. So we came back at the end of the process. But yeah, we managed to definitely decompress a bit. I had amazing time with my wife and my kids. We spent time at the beach in Spain. It wasn't that hot anymore, but it was still lovely and very different than being in the UK in November, I can tell you that for sure. And yeah, you get a bit of downtime, you get time to listen to music, talk with friends, talk with your family, and just spend time very uninterrupted with family that you hardly ever get. So my recommendation to everybody, whoever has the opportunity to actually take not just a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, right, but take an extended period of time off between jobs, absolutely worth doing. Yeah, it's a bit scary, right? If you leave a job and don't necessarily have another one yet, that's a very strange thought to do. But if you're confident in your skills and your abilities and you're learning, you've got a good network, right? You can do that. But I mean, obviously, financial planning here is important. I'm not advising anybody to just like quit your job and then call me the next day that you run out of money. But it's definitely possible if you think ahead a little bit and plan for it. And it's a fantastic time. So I definitely don't regret it.
I'm coming up now on my 2-year anniversary here at Nektar. And when I accepted the job, I said, look, I need a little bit of a break before we can really dive into this next opportunity and challenge. So I just took 4 weeks off, right? And 4 weeks, I probably could have used another couple, but it was really great to just do what you said, spend time with family, do a little bit of travel, and just get away from the pressures of everything. And I think that what that allowed me to do is just go in with a lot more energy, right? And so I'd recommend anybody that can do that. It's really healthy.
Yeah, it's super special. And I actually took that as a tip from a senior leader that I've worked with for many years. He always took several months or quarters, sometimes even, between major roles, where he completely like went deep and spent all his energy, and then he needed like months to almost recharge.
Yeah.
And he said it's super important, and he really values both, right? He really values being very intensely ingrained in your job and spending a lot of energy there, but then also like coming out of it on a regular basis and spending time with family and friends and doing things very, very differently, and spending time on personal projects, whether that is a remodel or just learning how to play the piano, right? Spend 3 months doing that, like whatever you want to do. It's fantastic. And yeah, you need some time to really switch off. Like a 2-week holiday is just not the same, because you're still there. The emails will be there, the Slack messages will be there. You've got all this stuff going on. And unless you're really switching off and deconnecting, don't have an account anymore,
it's not the same. Exactly. Yeah. So thinking about your past couple of roles currently, as well as at Remote and Mongo, what's your favorite part of your job of leading revenue operations at different companies?
It's my favorite part. I love really working with the teams. I love the go-to-market teams that typically have a great energy, great vibe, great level of intensity about them. I then pair that with more the analytical mindset maybe that I typically find in my own RevOps teams. And that combination like just makes for really interesting challenges, but also really great opportunities to solve those puzzles and working with the teams to do it. And that's what I really enjoy. And that's what I also usually look for, people that work with me, great puzzle solvers. And are they interested in puzzles and challenges? And do they get a kick out of solving a challenge, however big? That's probably the most fun part out of our job. How do you make growth scalable, sustainable, fast, measurable and effective. And those are effectively all puzzles that come in a weird sequence and random order, and you have to deal with them.
Now, there's always going to be a flip side of that question. And for the listeners of our show, they know I always ask this flip side question, which is, what's your least favorite part? Or said a different way, what's really hard about leading revenue operations for a company like Multiverse?
I think the hardest part there is like, part of revenue operations also means that sometimes you have to be the team or the person that says no, right? That holds up a policy, that holds up a guideline or rule and says, hey, you can't do that because of X, or see, you're violating our rules of engagement. Like, the effect now means this. So you're playing not necessarily police, right? But like, you're enforcing certain rules, and it's just never fun to do that. Like, I mean, maybe some people like it. I don't like it. It's part of the job. We have to do it, and we try to make it as rational and as clear and transparent, as simple as possible, and keep the rules plain and simple, and try to be as generous as we can, whether that is, I don't know, like parental leave covers, or whether that is quota assignments, or whether that is like compensation rules, right? Like, we try to be generous and make it easy and fun for people to work in a company. Yeah. But there is limitations, right? And you have to be responsible as well with regards to the company and the finances and everything else, and fairness and treating people the same. So that part is sometimes a bit challenging, getting that right and getting the balance right there between wanting to be pragmatic, but also not being able to constantly give in to every exception and setting a precedent with certain cases, even though you maybe sometimes like, okay, that totally resonates with me, but I still can't do it because of X. Because if I do that for you, then I've got 5 more cases next week, and I just can't do that. It would be just a major distraction if you open up those floodgates.
Yeah. All right, last question. When you're not remodeling a house or putting an extension in your house, on the weekends, what do you do for fun, or how do you decompress?
I spend a lot of weekends, especially spend lots of time with my family. I've got 2 small kids, 2 and 4, so they take up a lot of energy from my wife and from me on the weekend for sure. And I love spending time with them. I love going swimming with my little boy, or just, I know, trying to, like, my girl is now starting to use a balance bike. So we do that on the weekends. We go walking. We live in the countryside, so there's beautiful walks around here and beautiful old English estates that where you can walk in the grounds.
Oh, wow.
So that's really fun. We have a nice garden where we spend some time. The kids run around, play on the swings, and I'm digging, weeds out of the flower bed. So just try to do something that's not necessarily digital, do some exercise, a bit of running, a bit of strength and conditioning. We like to cook. I like to bake personally. I like bread baking. So like simple stuff, meeting with friends, meeting with family. Yeah. I try to be non-digital, probably.
Yes.
For the most part, at least.
Yeah. Well, listen, Roman, this was a wonderful episode. I thought it was a great conversation, and you shared some amazing insights. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate having you on the show. That is another episode of the Revenue Lounge. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.